now, despite their surface level differences?
Domestically, actually, quite a bit. I think the international orders where things maybe get a little bit different. I mean, we saw, for example, leftists were concerned about kids in cages until 2020, and then they all forgot about it magically overnight. But we also see that even in terms of policy, and that all but 9 of the Democratic senators cited to empower Trump for his ICE raids and to fund it, meaning that the consensus among the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party was to get behind the ball on that. Where things seem different is this international stuff, because what Trump is saying has effects. I mean, and when I talk about effects, I don't just mean, you know, I mean, even if we don't take his threat of annexation particularly seriously, it has destabilized the Canadian dollar pretty significantly. And the bigger thing doing that is the tariffs, which I do think everyone should take very seriously, even though I didn't a couple of months ago. The reason why I didn't a couple months ago is I had a hard time believing that American capital would risk its own supply chain, and that they really were actually calling the shots on most of this stuff. And they are in some ways. I mean, Musk intervening on the H-1 visas actually indicates there is a limit to certain elements of MAGA populism, no matter what Steve Bannon thinks. And Steve Bannon's lost that fight before. If we remember, he was ousted in the first administration fairly quickly. But what does this actually mean? I mean, it radically destabilizes even the attempt to friendshore. If you were trying to reshore up Fortress North America, to friendshore stuff and production back to North America, and including the U.S., this is actually pretty dramatic acceleration, which destabilizes the ability to do that with our 2 closest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. And by 2 closest trading partners, I do not mean in like the finished product sense. I mean in the sense of actually producing capital itself, which is done through a lot of raw goods going across the Canadian and U.S. border. Now, part of this may be some maverick stuff with energy prices, but I've heard people try to predict this as 40-dimensional chess before. And sometimes we just might have to take statements on face value that Trump might mean it. The question is, does he really have the capacity to do it? What has become clear is that he has remade his party. The old Republic, the old GOP after Bush seems to be dead. And one of the, I think symbolically, if you looked at the events recently, when Obama was hanging out with Trump, and then George Bush showed hostility to Trump in those pictures, there does seem to be some kind of symbolism to that, that does belie almost in a spectacular way a kind of truth about where we are. I think we have to take a bigger deal out of the threats to Mexico, because that's got more talk in the Senate and the House behind it. But it's hard to know. I mean, we're talking about a person who's also beginning to say he will acquire emergency powers to do all kinds of things that haven't been done in the presidency before through emergency powers. And this is a trend, to be fair to Trump, that has been increasing in U.S. life since the Clinton administration, and definitely accelerated it in the Bush administration. And it's not like Obama nor Biden really wanted to completely undo unitary executive privilege, because they also benefited from it. You know, back to get to something Cuba said, and then I'll shut up for a while on this continuity thing. There is a way in which I think this was kind of unfortunately inevitable when the liberal world order under Bretton Woods didn't come up with a universal currency, and we still relied on national currencies backed by stated gold reserves that made this somewhat inevitable. Keynes's Bancor did not happen because obviously it was a threat to the national sovereignty of almost every state in the Bretton Woods Agreement. But if it had happened, it would have changed a lot of the calculations on what these natures could utilize as far as soft power by the 60s and 70s. And that would have actually probably had an effect even domestically, because it would have discouraged deindustrialization in some ways, because part of what led to deindustrialization was leverage about the currency. I don't have a good answer to any of this, nor do I have a clear way to say we know what Trump's going to do. The one thing I can say about Trump is there is a sense that he throws everything in the kitchen sink at the wall, and also his coalitions constantly shift. But what it does mean, and what it has meant in a way that I think we do have to ask ourselves a little bit, the first Trump administration, despite what everyone in the streets was saying, was not that out of line with prior American norms. This current Trump administration, if we are to take his current statement seriously, is a total rebuke to the status quo, including the status quo of the prior Trump administration. And it puts everyone in a weird position of defending a status quo that no one really believes is viable anymore, for reasons that have to do with nothing involving Trump, although that led to him. And I don't think there's not an easy answer to that. And if I was Canada, I don't know what I'd be doing right now, because Cuba's right. Canada has been a loyal a junior partner forever, even when it wasn't really in his interest. Yeah, it's not getting rewarded for it that well right now. Everybody in North America was probably thinking we were going to have Fortress North America in this realignment, and now we're talking about 51st states. The kind of jokes I used to make to rib my Canadian friends who were my Canadian nationalist friends who always thought America was secretly thinking about taking them over. And
not secretly.
Now it's not so secret anymore.
It's out in the open, man. It's like,
I mean, Trump says he won't use military on Canada. That's the only that's the only group he said he won't use military for. But
because they have good weights.
The I think that the moving from the gentleman's agreement of the Western community, the transatlantic community, however you want to put it, to a position where everyone is just subject to either economic or direct military coercion, and not just to bend and shift on policy issues, not for a UN vote, but over territorial sovereignty. Well, at that point, at best, we're back to a world of spheres of influence where regional hegemons create explicitly imperial structures over explicitly subject peoples. And this is not an unusual condition, given the long span of world history, but one which inevitably leads to a great deal of interstate conflict, as well as the use of force against millions of people just to maintain the arbitrary power at the center of the system. There's a reason why it was considered an evolution in the maintenance of hegemony to have a regular rules-based order, that America, at the peak of its power, didn't want to change borders, didn't want to absorb new territories as states or dependencies, right? Much better to have a an order of de jure sovereign states, which you could be at the center of, one where there's some flexibility and and at least the fig leaf of local self-determination. But this is not just blowing up the structures of American hegemony, but it may fatally undermine the basis of American hegemony, right? The middle powers might get a better deal from Russia, might get a better deal from China than offered by the United States. And you have many elites inside the United States that have benefited from the rules-based international order, don't see a reason to abandon it in favor of these harebrained MAGA schemes, and don't see what you even get out of ludicrous, kind of quixotic venture into Greenland, or trying to redo the Panama Canal Zone.